What's a subtle sign someone has been through some crap? I had a near-death experience, and it put in perspective what actually mattered to me in my life and what didn't. I used to be easily embarrassed by a lot of things and worry about what people thought about me. But embarrassment means that someone has seen or heard something about you that you didn't want them to, and that will spread into people's opinion in the future. Thing is, if you're dead, you don't have a future. So at that moment, I thought to myself how stupid I was to care about those things. I wished I had spent that time and energy on people I love or the things I wanted to do instead. After that experience, though, I have a future now. I find it pretty hard to be embarrassed by most things. And if I do feel it, no way in heck would I let it stop me from doing what I need to for the people I love or myself. Ironically, after gaining that mentality, people started asking me how I could be so confident sometimes. But it's not that I'm confident. I just have things more important to me than being worried about embarrassment. Story 2. When I was younger, I went shopping with my cousins. My uncle told us we could get whatever we want. So my cousins excitedly went around the store looking at whatever items there were. I literally didn't know what to do and only got one inexpensive thing after my uncle had to constantly reassure me that it's okay if I pick out a few things I like. The reason being, anytime my parents spent money on me, whether it be for necessities, school, extracurriculars, whatever, they would throw it back in my face later on and make me feel guilty for asking for things or having money spent on me. So I eventually just stopped asking for things. 2 days ago, my dad asked me why I never ask for anything or want to buy anything ever, and I didn't even bother explaining because I didn't feel like being gaslit into believing that the things I experienced as a kid never actually happened. It sucks, but it's whatever. Edit 1. Wow, I wasn't expecting to get this many replies. I'm going to answer a few questions so I don't have to individually respond to 11 different people. Why don't you bring this up to your parents? I have, but I don't anymore because it's incredibly mentally taxing to constantly have your trauma dismissed or compared to someone else who's had it worse. Were your parents struggling financially? Without disclosing too much about my life on this app, no, we weren't. They would willingly pay for things for me, but once they get upset for some reason, it's time to throw it in our face again. I've always been the scapegoat, so I even started begging my parents not to rub stuff, expenses, grades, mental health issues in my face. And they promised me multiple times that they wouldn't. But I've had basically every little mistake thrown in my face at some point or another. I'll answer more questions here if people are curious. Thanks for all the support. I've gotten teary-eyed reading your comments. We're so much more than our trauma, and I hope each and every one of you can see that. Story 3. Unusually bad memory for the kind of person they are. Edit. Since this is getting so much traction, I'd like to list how I personally deal with this issue. It affects my attention and information retaining abilities, so I do these steps to help with that side. 1. Communication. Tell your friends. Get them to understand that sometimes experiences won't stick with you even if you paid attention and enjoyed it. 2. Write your activities and goals down. You won't be left wondering what you did yesterday and what you wanted to do earlier that day either. Being able to refer back to that information is a lifesaver, both literally and metaphorically. Helps me stay sane. 3. Review conversations and what you may be learning from them. This is a great time to use the second tip. You can write down how you felt or how you interpreted new information. I did that today, for example, since I'm trying to learn how to set up commissions and bank accounts and whatnot. Spending some extra time at the end of the day seriously helped me retain that information. 4. Progress is slow towards a normal memory. It's taken me like 10-ish years to be able to actually feel more like a functioning adult and less like a snail in my mental capacity. I couldn't hang on to any information besides what I needed to pass school tests and trauma. Regaining or repairing your memory takes a lot of time, much like the healing process takes a lot of time. 5. Most importantly, understand your own self. It's similar to depression, where it's very overwhelming, discouraging, and you can't put down an exact source of your issue. Accepting that makes moving forward a lot easier, since you'll spend less time beating yourself up over not having a tangible source of your issue, and more energy to try your best, since that's all you can do. 4. Paying very close attention to people's expressions and body language, mostly to see if they're annoyed or angry, underreacting to things, and over-explaining things that probably seem inconsequential to most. The first part is not wanting to set someone off. In tandem with this, most underreact because any expressions of unhappiness or anything that can be perceived as negative usually gets taken as an invitation to be unloaded upon or to have someone upset displace their anger, and then you end up the target of the tirade. A lot of people, myself included, over-explain things because it's a defense mechanism in anticipation of being yelled at or being very harshly criticized because the other person tries to pin the blame on you, even for things out of your control, which is why one over-explains. Edit. As others mentioned, that I forgot because I've been actively working to counteract these, apologizing too much, and at least for me, not being able to joke. People constantly point out that I take everything very seriously or that I don't laugh or don't joke well. It's because I've had moments where someone said something so ridiculous and illogical, I think it must be a joke, but they weren't joking, and they got quite mad. So from then on, I simply took everything seriously and at face value, because on the off chance it wasn't meant to be a joke, I would at least not be yelled at. It's quite scary as a child when you are told something that sounds absurd and you think it must be comedic, and then react in that way, but then it's just hours of berating later. It's like walking into an ambush. You learn not to risk it. Also, thank you guys for the replies, comments, and awards. I've thanked generous awarders and explained to them, but I'll say it here. I'm sad people could relate to this. All your comments about seeing yourselves in this were hard, but at the same time, I am glad you all felt seen and understood. It's more important to me that you all realize you are not alone in your experiences. I hope you are all doing better. Yeah, this one feels a little real for everybody, huh? Except with the minor note that I mess around all the time, much to the annoyance of others. Sorry, guys. Story 5. My sister's 6-year-old friend came for a visit. She was a foster kid placed with some church friends of ours. When she got to our house, my dad told them they could grab some snacks from the pantry. Then, every 20 or so minutes for 4+ hours, she would go to our fridge or pantry, open the door, look like she's searching for something, close the door, and go back and play. When she left, my dad found a stash of snacks under my sister's bed she had put there. Her foster parents had told my dad that it could happen, so he wasn't surprised. But I remember kind of yelling at her to stop opening up the fridge and my dad taking me aside to explaining why she was doing this. Now, this is the part that still makes my heart break and my blood boil. Since age 3, she'd been living out of a car, and her doped-up mom and a brother who couldn't have been 2 years old. When they finally stayed long enough in one area for CPS to become aware of the situation, she was 5. Her mom would disappear for days and leave them in the car by themselves. This little girl at age 6 had such a strong food scarcity trauma that her survival instinct was to check for food every 20 minutes at a stranger's house. Now, of you that have made it this far, I have some good news. That girl and her brother were adopted by that foster family shortly after and have grown up relatively well. But I will never forget the survival instincts present in that little girl's eyes. Story 6. Apologizing constantly as if for simply existing. Either being extremely evasive and reserved in relationships or clinging on for dear life, perhaps oscillating between the two. Feeling more comfortable in chaos and pain because that's more familiar than stability and comfort. Living in a constant state of flight or fight or freeze or fawn, not just in terms of hypervigilance type of stuff, but when applied to their life in general. Not fully being able to identify typical emotions, having trouble expressing how they're feeling or being completely numb and seemingly immune to reactions. Retelling traumatic events as if they were just another mundane life experience, and oftentimes not even realizing it was something traumatic, or being completely sparse with details about their life and past. Feeling constant guilt and shame, especially when it comes to something as simple as treating themselves occasionally, or even just attending to their basic needs, whilst simultaneously feeling guilty for even so much as asking for help and support. Helping and being there for others to the detriment of their own mental health and well-being. Daydreaming a lot or being out of it. Struggling to pay attention or actively dissociating throughout the day. That's all I can think of right now. Story 7. Being one of these people, here's the short list. We don't overreact when crap hits the fan. We don't cry in public. We don't talk about our personal lives. We don't communicate our feelings, and we always have an exit. We aren't and never will be the center of attention. Remember this one, birthdays. We hurt every day and we turn that pain into something that probably isn't healthy and we bury it, and we use it as fuel for the fire for our endeavors. We are fine being alone for extended periods of time. We won't reach out when we need help, and if we do, it's because we're at a level of desperation no one can truly realize. We keep secrets, our own, yours, and everyone else's, and won't let them out even under punishment of torture or death. We move silently, as if under stealth. We do it even without realizing, often scarring people. We watch and notice everything. We know when you lie. We know when strangers lie. We don't expose any vulnerability. We sit with our backs to the wall. We can feel it when people are approaching from behind, even at great distances. We can tell when others are hurting. Sometimes we can just smell it on you. We know how to do things that most people aren't aware of, and people are often surprised when they see us do it. We always expect the worst and know we will escape it just fine. Story 8. If they keep to themselves. Being quiet and not talking to people defies what humans are. We are social creatures, but sometimes somebody commits a tragedy to someone and that causes them to become inward and withdrawn. They focus all their energy internally, energy that should be spent with other people. But PTSD and bad memories and experiences can sully the idea of being sociable. It can feel like you're in the wrong for wanting to be liked because someone in your life made you think you were unlikable. So if someone likes a person as horrible as yourself, you see them as a bad person. At least this is how my antisocial behaviors manifest. I have to do a lot of work on it, but I've come to realize the reason I am not sociable a lot of the time is because I've seen too many good people be evil, too many people betray your trust, and the majority of people are not worth wasting my time with. I have started to overcome my crippling self-doubt and anxiety by understanding the nuanced patterns of care and abuse, and how many people don't hold their values close when scrutinized. People are shallow. I always thought I was deeper than others, but that's not the case. It's simply that I haven't fallen victim to the more common fallacies that seem to rule the minds of people. Life is hard, and if you can do mental exercises and make yourself a priority, you will hurt others, but life will be easier for you. Many people take that route, and I'm close to doing the same, but I will never lose my sense of how to treat people well. Even if society tells me that stepping on the toes is the best way to succeed in life, I will always try to find the good in people and try to make this shared human experience a positive one. Also, if they go on rants in the comments about people's values like me, they've probably been through some events to compel them to write all that. Story 9. Emotional exhaustion. The person seems constantly tired and is lazy in a sense that they don't choose to be lazy. They're forced to because they're so exhausted from severe stress, trauma, anxiety, and/or depression. High levels of stress buildup can cause permanent physical damage. That person may never not be tired every single day. They will likely complain about their entire body hurting, and this will get worse and worse as life goes on, especially if they continue to experience traumatizing things. This exhaustion is the body basically saying, I give up. I can't fight it anymore. I can't deal with it. I'm sick of it. I'm just going to shut down, and you won't ever be the same person you used to be. Maybe we'll just die together. Many people don't take emotional exhaustion and others seriously, and some go as far as to say it doesn't exist, claiming it's voluntary laziness. It is serious, and if it's not caught soon enough, it will be unlikely that it gets repaired. If it's really bad, the person can make self-deprecating jokes where they laugh as they insult themselves, as well as casually make comments about committing self-unaliving. Usually their friends will react with an awkward, shocked silence. Story 10. I know a guy who was a former Navy corpsman, basically a combat medic that deploys with the USMC. He did it for 16 years, and during one of his many tours, he was shot in the hand, lost his pinky finger, and got shot half a dozen times in the back, some in the armor, some in the flesh, as he fell, all while carrying a critically wounded Marine on his shoulder who wouldn't make it. He was one of the most chilled, relaxed, kind people I've ever met. In fact, if you could physically see some of his injuries, his hand, you wouldn't believe that he had been through any of them. If anyone had a right to be rude, a bitter and angry person, it would probably be him, but he wasn't. He was just happy to be alive. Story 11. Not sweating the details of everyday life, people who get massively upset about Taco Bell forgetting the sauce or the ice machine at the hotel being broken, or totally losing their crap because someone else gets cut into the line ahead of them, those people have never been through real trauma, real loss, and real grief. Once you have the small details of life that just don't matter anymore, who gives a crap if someone else didn't have to wait as long as you did or they forgot the sauce? Life will go on. Shouting about it just makes noise. Those aloof, never upset about everything, I'll get there when I get there types are very often like that because they are just happy to be there. Trauma leads to nihilism. That can manifest in many ways, but it very often manifests as Phoebe from Friends. You just don't get upset about the details anymore. I am, of course, painting with a broad brush, and yes, sometimes people are just annoying idiots despite or even because of trauma. I was going to say, people react to trauma in different ways, and some people are just bitter and want to take it out on everybody in the world. Story 12. I lost my whole family, and everyone is always surprised I have no reaction for most trivial things. I honestly think people get upset over nothing way too much, like your roommate drank your milk. Okay, at least you have a home. I was homeless. You cannot break me with your BS issues. People who complain about their parents in unnecessary ways, taking their kind gestures as a slight to earn their affection. I'm like, man, I wish my mom and dad were here to buy me a cake on my birthday. I'm sorry you got the wrong cake. I have these inner feelings, but outwardly I am very compassionate and will do everything I can to help someone even if they are ruining their own day. Story 13. Well, this has been like a mirror. I'll just call myself out with the main ones that impact my life. It's a mix of good and bad. 1. Ability to quickly recognize toxicity and personality disorders as distinct from personality quirks and imperfections that can be reasoned with. Then, a zero tolerance policy, taking measures to get and keep those people out of our space. 2. Setting very clear boundaries in terms of what parts of us someone has access to, how close they can get, and enforcing them, and not crossing those boundaries ourselves so as to be fair and reinforce that's how it is between us and the others. 3. Always single, complete loss of interest, even repulsion at the first sign of someone trying to control or manipulate us. Sometimes real, other times just people forming an attachment and wanting to be a bigger part of your life. Obsession if infatuated with someone but they are not reciprocating. But if they did, it would not take long to flip back to repulsion at the intrusion into our lives. Story 14. Okay, have to be a villain here since a lot of the views here are trying to say a lot of heroic things that romanticize people who struggled. Real crap, a lot of people who have been through the ringer adapt to it. Not everyone who's been through horror are broken toys, and no disrespect to those people, I actually prefer them, and my heart breaks for them, and the struggle they have to face daily. Thing is, throughout human history, barbarians who have had both bad things done to them, but also do bad crap like murder, essay, an entire village, and they do it with a smile. That said, with modern culture, a lot of people who have been through crap have a good sense of humor, and they often come off as a-holes to people who haven't faced hardships and think the common Reddit. You're not being straight up or saying it how it is, you're just an a-hole, which is the common response and true half the time. But someone who's been through crap would laugh harder because they know or believe they're real and straight up and living in the real world. They can't afford to be disconnected with reality because there's real consequences. Believe it or not, some people can handle horror. It doesn't make people undergo trauma like PTSD any lesser, but pretending that's the standard isn't realistic. I hate even saying it, but I've been through crap. And something really annoying is when people find out they think I'm damaged or in denial and need therapy, when they're just talking to me normally a few minutes ago and I know this isn't the norm. But I've had friends who have been through dark crap that will make your heart bleed for them, while the same person will go to a bar to pick a fight with someone completely innocent and just hanging out, and would try to paralyze them for life and make jokes about it and still be chill and hang out the next day like nothing happened. Story 15. I've been through some crap. With 2 tours to Afghanistan, diagnosed with PTSD, I'll provide my insight. I exude a calm confidence. I term it as talking softly and carrying a big stick. I don't go into the world looking for hostility, but if required, I can and have responded accordingly. I choose where I sit in restaurants so I can maintain control of my surroundings. My PTSD displays in hypervigilance. I'm very acute to the sounds of aircraft. I can usually identify the type of helicopter from the sound of their rotors, so I show signs of distraction sometimes. I self-isolate, in that I'm out and about just trying to do what I need to do. I rely on myself and myself only. The bullcrap you might have heard about the 1,000-yard stare is crap from the 70s after Vietnam. That has no place in today's society. We veterans tend to stuff things into our own little bottle and not talk about them, due to a perceived expectation of ridicule and commit self-unaliving. The number of veteran self-unalivings is astronomical. If you're a veteran and you need help, please reach out. I did, and I'm in a much better place now. Story 16. Was in the military for a long time, and I grew up in an abusive household. The one that stands out in this thread is treating going through trauma as some superpower that makes you special in relation to other people. Stuff like, everybody else lost their head when some extremely awful thing happened, but because I'm so desensitized, I didn't even flinch. As if trauma makes you hip to what's real and everybody else is just the sheeple without a clue. There's nothing good about this. To be human is to have emotions, and the reason they're suppressed is because you've gone through so much your brain has basically shut down your emotional response to cope. It puts you at risk for depression, anxiety, and a whole host of mental illness that can absolutely ruin your life. The American taxpayer trained me and my buddies pretty well to survive in pain, thrive in chaos, and win at war. As a result, a not insignificant number of men, and I use that word specifically, I served with have committed self-unaliving, or threatened to because they sucked it up till the emotional pain exceeded their threshold to cope. I promise you, I am not a better person for over the course of one weekend having to deal with one of my old subordinates calling me at midnight to tell me he was going to unalive himself and leave his child fatherless because he couldn't go through a second divorce, only to wake up after spending hours talking that guy off the edge to have another fellow veteran and dear friend call me in tears, unable to speak because he just found his veteran roommate dead in his bed from shooting himself. It's terrible. In my experience, that easy tell for trauma is low emotional regulation in response to pretty menial stuff. Someone makes a mildly disrespectful remark and the recipient flies off the handle. The person who loses it has probably been through some stuff. I think it's mostly malarkey that people who've been through some stuff have special abilities as a result. We're all human beings, and traumatic events come at the cost of suffering. You either don't see it from the outside looking in, or the traumatized person is deluding themselves into believing that they're fine. Story 17. The flinch. It's rarely noticed by anyone other than the abused and abusers. It's often not even noticed by the person doing it. It's such a small, involuntary movement in the shoulders as a reaction to the stimuli, to the extent that when you point it out, people think you're crazy. Next is the stare. Not quite the 1,000-yard stare. This is where they stare into the middle distance while in an otherwise calm environment. They are relatively safe, so their minds slow down and shut down to recover or stretch their energy reserves. Caused by near constantly being in survival mode, this persists even when no longer in survival mode, sometimes for years. The quiver, an involuntary and often very short quivering of the lips or voice when confronted, usually as a result of being yelled and shouted at by authority figures and or abusers in youth. The scan, aka hypervigilance, the periodic scanning of their environment, the quickly looking at perceived movement or sound. The gifting, where traumatized individuals feel the need to gift others to either mollify perceived anger and displeasure or to bribe nice people to stick around. This can include sexual acts, perfectionism, where they will not accept what they have done as sufficient, but will accept poor or shoddy work and treatment from others. Attention, reassurance seeking, an intrusive need for validation. This can also include sexual acts. Impulsivity, the sometimes irrational need for items or acts not appropriate for their environment or financial situation. This can include sexual acts. The freeze, a dissociative state where they either move robotically or not at all. The fawn, where they are overly kind or complimentary to those around them. This to both, either to abusers or those acting kindly. There are more, but these are some that I have seen. Story 18. I had a rough childhood, so I got PTSD as a reward for surviving that. Then in 2020, my 14-year-old daughter took her own life. The PTSD I already had made me very calm in any situation. I remember sitting on the floor and calling my mom to not bother coming over because my daughter, was gone. I remember mom screaming and hysterical saying it wasn't true. I told her it was, and she should go back home. I had called her before. My son called me and said she'd made an attempt and how to do CPR. The next call I got, my son was hysterical, so I knew. I talked to a paramedic who confirmed it. I had called my mom between those calls to get her to drive me to the hospital. There are so many moments I don't remember, and some I wish I didn't. Sadly, I've noticed my son has become this very calm person. I live like the worst is always around at the corner. I freak out if I don't hear from someone in a specific time frame. Calls in the night I always assume to be bad news. I have super anxiety, so I just don't go anywhere anymore. Story 19. I've been through some crap and I'm looking at this thread out of curiosity. I see lots of things people talk about in the comments that are very much me, including empathy and understanding, apologizing for things that are not my fault, not crying often, even when I want to, and when I do cry, good luck trying to stop me, not putting myself first, no expression changes when something bad happens, sounds about right, not asking for anything, can't deal with confrontation, not trusting people or relying on people a lot. I trust my family and a group of friends, but that's about it. Not opening up about my issues and being vulnerable for everybody, see above for reasoning. Not talking about my personal past. This one is pretty new. Story 20. I used to be a douchebag, a conceited and depressed intellectual. I struggled with depression for about 20 years, but after a close person committed self-unaliving 8 years ago, I changed. Now I always listen to what people say. I'm always trying to be understanding. I started seeing things I didn't see, like subtleties in people's behavior. I was born an inflexible and intellectual and judgmental person, and it has also to do with me being an autistic, a lighter level but still ASD. But things changed. and I learned how to recognize people who've been through these difficult moments. It's in their eyes, and they won't laugh at effed up things people find funny. They know what it means to truly feel despair. We know. This changes literally everything in someone's life. You learn the hard way how to be careful and responsible about your words and actions. And when I realize other people do not see other people's pains, that's when I know how shallow the world is. So living with most people becomes sort of feeling like an alien because you can't be a good vibes person. Now things have gotten way better, but these experiences are always there. Story 21. I could check just about every box of abuse suffered as a child. Reading this thread, just wow. I can relate to many of these specific incidents, but there is hope. I recently, 2 years ago, finally got into some serious therapy, and it really has made a difference. First, it is never too late to start therapy. My abuse was in the 70s and 80s. I didn't seek therapy seriously until I was getting hallucinations and flashbacks when dealing with my mother's funeral. Now onto the subtle signs that people have noticed about me. The ghost walk, someone mentioned. People have frequently commented how quiet I am when I walk. When I was a teenager, I was called an old soul and told my eyes had way too much going on to be as young as I was. I served at bars without being carded, flinching, quiet, things like that. I have learned to use some of these survival mechanisms as a benefit when applied to the correct circumstances. Reading people during interviews, I could tell who was using us as a doorway to the company by subtle changes in their tone. I could tell when people were lying. It has helped weed out people that I truly believe would not have stayed in my group any longer than contractually required. I have an even temper. Yelling in my face doesn't faze me, even if it should. I have diffused situations simply by not reacting to them. Anyway, break is over. Back to work. Great conversation topic. Story 22. This post seems to have gotten so popular, so I figured it would be useful to share how to deal with people who've been through crap. Since there's different types of crap a person could have been through, my opinions are based on those with attachment issues developed at an early age, but some could be applicable over a broader spectrum. Empathy, not sympathy. Looking for a shoulder to cry on? Find someone else. Looking to solve the problem? They're just your person. This works both ways if they open up to you about a problem they're asking for your opinion and how to solve it. Check your reliance on them. Do you have that one person who's your go-to problem solver that you're overly reliant on? It's probably worth taking a step back before resentment sets in. That person is probably thinking of ways to solve your issue long after the conversation is ended, which leads me nicely on to, don't force your help on them. They've got trust issues. They've probably been let down 1,000 times, usually from a young age. You should offer help, but being persistent and trying to force it at one particular moment will be stressful for them. Confrontation. They'll try to avoid confrontation due to experiences from their childhood. 9 times out of 10, they'll be passive, but the 1 time out of 10, they'll rip your head off. Discussions, not arguments, should be had, conducted logically and without negative emotion. Their problems. The 2 ways you'll learn about their problems are through self-deprecating humor, or they'll use it in the context, explaining the actions of others. Take note of point 1 if they'll tell you about them. They need regular time to themselves, just leave them alone. Compliments. Be cautious when complimenting or receiving compliments is still a new concept to them. Feel free to add your own or critique the ones I've given. I'm sure if there's more I've missed or forgotten. Story 23. Hello, some things I picked up on about myself being a survivor of childhood emotional abuse. Throwaway because yeah, this crap can help someone who is in the situation I was in. 1. Taking on a nurturing role in most relationships to compensate for what I never got. Someone to lean on. 2. Flinching at little things. 3. Being called mature for my age. 4. Trust issues, not glamorous, more like panic attacks. 5. Being scary good at reading other people, tone of voice, expressions, body language. 6. Can't take a compliment, a very strong refusal to accept them. 7. Being really good at helping others through traumas because we had to do it alone more of the time. 8. We can brush off some things like nothing at all happened, but little things can set off a trauma response. 9. Really good at faking smiles and laughter. 10. Very secretive about a lot of little things. 11. Fear of being vulnerable. 12. Seeking physical touch yet also hating it at the same time. And about a million more that I haven't thought up of yet, but you get the gist. Anyways, I should be sleeping now. Story 24. Going to get buried for sure. Grew up with some major emotional abuse and trauma. Caused me to be ultra low confrontational and allowed people to walk all over me. I had very low self-esteem. Graduate high school and went into the military. Luckily, no combat. Anxiety and depression amplified greatly. Took to drinking and very dark humor. Witnessed someone falling 20 feet from a rope, repelling from my aircraft, shut me down further. Almost died in a house fire, more dark humor, and considered that my second shot. Mental health was still crap though. Shortly after the fire, lost a very good friend to a motorcycle accident and basically shut down to basic survival mode. Was quiet but cracked jokes to cheer the others up. Spent the last 6 months in getting absolutely screwed by the system. Finally got home, and 4 months later my best friend blows a hole in his head, broke down at work. Recovered and drove home, took care of everyone that day, and at night went to the place and spent 3 hours cleaning up my best friend's blood and brains so his family didn't have to. Dove deeper into survival mode and almost burnt out to the point of needing medical attention. Finally sought out proper help and overcame a lot of my issues and formed healthier coping mechanisms. Still deal with light anxiety and depression to this day. Only my mom can really tell when I'm in a slump. I'm loved by my friends, but at the same time feel like a burden and rarely get invited. Possible mental lapse or not understanding non-direct invites. I'm almost always overly stimulated and constantly surveying my surroundings. I walk very quietly, a habit from childhood trauma, and now have to walk with extra keys to jingle so people know I'm there otherwise. I legit just blend into nothingness. I've lost count of how many people just walk into me in public because I blend in, or how many coworkers I've startled because they don't see or hear me walk up to them. I've grown, healed, and matured a lot over the past couple years. I have friends that I love and they love me back, but I've put on an armored shell for so long and hide so well that out of everyone, I know only 2 people for sure can tell when I'm off, with maybe 2 others who can kind of tell. Through all my troubles, I've reached out and tried helping people and giving them healthy advice or being their sober friend at social functions. And even after just scratching the surface of my traumas, I've had almost every single one ignore my sincere help, and I've watched many spiral to their lowest points. True trauma is blatantly obvious but almost impossible to see. The greatest thing I've heard regarding my traumas was from my therapist a couple years back. After giving him my history at the first appointment, he just looked at me with his mouth slightly open and a confused look on his face and asked, "How are you not addicted to drugs or dead yet?" That hit in a good way, and at this point I'd say I'm on my 3rd life. People look at me like I'm crazy when I tell them that, but it's helped me enjoy and embrace life more than most. Story 25. Alright, so I don't want to go too deep into details, but I have PTSD. Not military or combat related, and here are a few that people have noticed about me. Constantly apologizing for everything, and not able to listen when hearing about others' problems. They seem so silly to me, like, dude, shut up, your problems are nothing. Flinching a lot for small, unexpected movements. But the big tell? Reacting strongly to seemingly random smells. You could be having a conversation, everything is great, we're smiling and laughing until all of a sudden I go completely silent and expressionless. Usually this is because I have picked up a smell that instantly brought me back to a rough moment in my memories. This is very subtle most of the time, but smells bring you right back to the moment something happened, and it's completely all-consuming. Another one is cold sweats, all the time for no reason. Story 26. Atypical stress and trauma responses. That could be being hypervigilant and overreactive to seemingly small things or normal situations, like the misfire of a car or a hug. Disengaging and shutting down around certain topics, or becoming anxious or more emotional than others would expect, and have a lack of reaction to more severe occurrences. Anger as a coping mechanism. Sarcasm, particularly gallows humor, as a coping mechanism. Drug use as a coping mechanism. Drinking as a coping mechanism. Hypersexuality and impulse control issues as a coping mechanism. Inability to trust others, or paradoxically being overly trusting of abusive people. Being apathetic or self-deprecating to the extreme. Dislike for large crowds or noisy areas. Signs of moderate to severe agoraphobia or claustrophobia. It's kind of variable between people, their particular trauma, and how they attempt to cope with it. Story 27. I was in an emotionally abusive marriage for 10 years. Gaslighting, manipulation, straight up lying, massive fights over unimportant things because everything, and I do mean everything, had to be her way. At my worst, I was very close to being actively wanting to self-unalive. I was convinced everyone, including my kids, would be better off without me. The only emotions I experienced were anger and sadness, and I enjoyed basically nothing. The marriage sucked everything out of me and broke me down to just the absolute lowest depths. I was constantly in fight or flight mode. Through therapy and self-help material for people in relationships like that, I learned about boundaries and how to keep myself safe and healthy. I worked very hard to get healthy physically and emotionally, and when the time came to file for divorce, I was in a very good place and felt good about the decision. But the work didn't stop when I left her. I discovered my mother was a very manipulative, cold person. I started to see red flags in other people, and when I decided to start dating again, I was was very careful and very intentional about it. The thing is, a lot of us put up with a lot of crap from a lot of different people. Parents, friends, coworkers, random people. Being treated poorly or being treated like less than you are worth is shockingly normal for a lot of people. And when you decide to have and enforce boundaries and that there are things you simply won't tolerate, it can get uncomfortable. From the outside, it might look as though you're overreacting or being too sensitive, but when you've whittled down to something less than human by a person or people who should love and support you, you just don't let things get past the boundaries you've built. Story 28. I went through a lot of big, horrible life crap all at the same time. Partner of 6 years left me when they found an engagement ring. Turns out I have the wrong genitalia for them. And that was actually the only problem they had with me. It's brutal when you get left when nothing really went wrong. It kind of felt like my partner died right when I decided I wanted to spend the rest of my life with them. Then family members started dying left and right. I had to unplug my dad, and then my aunt, his sister, died while I was at my dad's funeral. A month later, we found out my mom had cancer. Then my sister relapsed and had a couple of overdoses. The COVID lockdown cost me my job and robbed me of the ability to visit my mom while going through treatments. All this in just 6 months. My whole life changed so fast. We were a really close family, so all of it was brutal. Now when things take a turn for the worst, they just don't seem anywhere near as bad as what I've already dealt with. I just handle it calmly. When things are boring, I'm happy. I feel like I enjoy simple things a lot more than I used to. But sometimes when really good stuff happens, I get a little sad. I feel more capable for having gone through it, but I feel like people around me get concerned when I don't freak out when they think I should be. Story 29. No boasting, no needing attention, just quietly doing their thing and keeping their heads down. I used to work at a working men's club in the industrial UK city in the late 80s and early 90s. Lots of old guys were regulars. Some were missing limbs or eyes. Some were missing something behind the eyes. Some were World War II veterans. Some were just guys that had come home from work to find their house or wife or kids obliterated by the Germans. To a man, none of them talked about anything other than sports and the weather, like the mundane was a life preserver in a rolling effing ocean of madness and chaos. Nice enough guys, but once in a while they'd get real effing deep into their cups, and that was some dark, horrible crap. I got the sense they'd spent decades just going through the motions as if pretending it never happened would magically make it all go away. It didn't. Story 30. Adoring the thought of intimacy, whether that be platonic or romantic, but being too scared to reach for it. So many people who've been through trauma love so deeply and dearly, but they are terrified of reaching out and loving someone for a plethora of reasons. Because just as easily as a person can be welcomed into your life, they can leave. This leads to letting people into your life way too easily or shutting people out entirely. When they let someone into their life too easily, the consequences are usually that that person they have received into their life isn't who they thought they were, and they are mean, cruel, and willing to take advantage of past trauma. People who've seen things tend to get into abusive friendships and relationships because they try to give people the benefit of the doubt and they get stabbed in the back. But even when the person they are around, they allow them to do unacceptable things because they believe in second chances. Shutting people out is an entire other side of the spectrum. There's such a lack of trust coming from that person that they refuse to confide in anyone. They love their people, the ones they trust, but sometimes those people aren't good for them at all. In a lot of cases, this is parents and family members that are pushed away and rejected. A refusal to ask for any kind of help or aid from whatever they are recovering from. The worst part is that most people have a mix of both of those things. People with trauma are some of the most emotionally connected and disconnected people who you will ever meet. There is such a fear of becoming close to someone who could turn around and hurt you, intentionally or not. But if you're friends with one of these people, they absolutely long for love and care. They want to shower others with affection and be shown it in return. But because of past experiences, it's seen as an impossibility. Story 31. They're mostly neutral and get irrationally angry. Doesn't get happy or sad about things normal people would be happy or sad about. This is very noticeable with me because I'm normally a super outgoing person and super energetic. But recently, because of an event that caused PTSD, I have acted super neutral and get angry at dumb things. And I've also not been talking too much. If someone is generally quiet, this doesn't mean they've been through something. And most of my friends have noticed it and always ask me, "What's wrong?" My response is always something like, "It's not important," or "It's nothing." So it's likely there's something wrong if you get a response like this. I'd suggest just letting the person know you're open to talk about it, but don't push them into talking about it. Story 32. I would say diminished reactions to loud noises such as metal falling, or even diminished reactions to getting hurt or almost getting hurt, like it's nothing but dust on their shoulders. For example, I've had a pretty traumatic childhood, 21 now, and when I'm at work, other people will be yelping and crap when stuff happens, but all I do is give a look over there, then go back to what I was doing. Or if I get hot oil splashed on me, I just wipe it off and barely react in pain at all. And this is fryer oil, so it's like 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Heck, one time I burned my arm better badly on a fryer basket on accident, and it was like a third-degree burn. And I just went to the first aid station, cleaned it, covered it, downed some ibuprofen, and went back to work with barely any reaction or acknowledgement. Even got a scar in the shape of a big L on my arm from it. Story 33. I used to be an elementary teacher. One of my students had absolutely no reaction whatsoever to getting or being hurt. He had slipped and gashed his shin and knee pretty bad one day, and there was blood everywhere. He came over to show me begrudgingly. I'm not really squeamish about blood myself, so all I could say was, "Oh my, we better clean that up." He was just annoyed that he was going to miss recess time. I asked him if it bothered him, and he basically said, "This is nothing. I've been hurt a lot worse before." It was a not-so-secret that his mom abused him. Despite many reports to CPS, they wouldn't remove him from her care. Food hoarding is also usually a pretty solid sign. Story 34. I used to have a roommate who always wore his shoes unless he was asleep. Even if he was sleeping and just waking up to pee, shoes would be on. I witnessed this because we both worked weird hours, so sometimes I'd be like settling in after work when he'd be waking up to get ready to go to work. So finally one day he wakes up just to drink some water, and he's in his boxers and Jordans, and I'm like, "Yo, dude, what's up with the shoe thing?" It's because he'd done some time in prison where you always need to wear your shoes because A, germs, and B, always gotta be ready in case crap goes down. Said he didn't feel safe without shoes on anymore. Nice guy and was working hard to turn his life around, but prison really messed him up. Story 35. If they're overly friendly or outgoing and love being the center of attention at parties, it's a sign of a potential personality disorder, and those are usually a sign of trauma from childhood. Usually because one of your parents was either heavily abusive, emotionally or physically, or neglectful. It's not always the case, some people are just really outgoing. But more often than you'd think, it's a sign of trauma. Not everyone that lives through a bad childhood trauma develops a personality disorder either. I have 6 siblings and my father is an undiagnosed narcissist. He meets 8 out of 9 criteria and you only need to meet 5 to be diagnosed professionally. Every single one of us has handled his abuse differently. I developed bad general and social anxiety. I've worked through a lot of it, don't worry. My brother potentially developed borderline personality disorder. My other brother has anxiety and anger issues. My first sister definitely qualifies for narcissistic personality disorder and maybe histrionic personality disorder. My next sister has anxiety and maybe depression and possibly high-functioning autism. But that's something you're born with. And my last sister has depression and anxiety. None of us escaped unscathed, unfortunately, but some of us got it way worse than others. Story 36. For sure, the little to no reaction, or in my case, the ability to compartmentalize the F out of things. When I was 16, my grandpa told me and my sisters that my mother had a seizure on the beach in Mexico during a cruise. She had a heart attack and heart surgery 2 years prior, so the stress this event could have had on her heart was terrifying to think of. Both my sisters burst into tears, and I just sat still, thinking. After a moment, I asked him the logistical question, "Was Mom okay? Where was Dad?" Grandpa gave us hugs and assurance and left. It wasn't until 1 in the morning when my emotions flipped back on, and I started to bawl too. Story 37. Found myself in so many comments. I don't trust anyone. I don't talk about myself to anyone unless I've known them for a long time. I can deal with stressful situations very well, but I have that one tipping point that when it's reached, it'll just cause so much stress for me. I'm quite independent. I don't rely on anyone else's help or empathy. It actually feels uncomfortable for me to ask for help. I can be cold sometimes to my partner and my children, but I feel this need to switch off rather than say something and hurt them. I don't have many friends. None of them are close, and I can't deal with other people's problems. My personal trauma is enough to carry around. I don't think I can feel sad for anyone who just lost a pet or something, as horrible as it sounds. I guess losing your childhood home, close family members, losing 10 years of your life living through war, being a refugee, being hungry, and homeless at times, without any hope will do that to someone. Story 38. Butting in out of the blue to solve situations they have no connection to and nothing to do with. Like a kind stranger, but very bluntly and no remorse, and you don't understand where they came from. But not in a creepy way, the difference is the attitude. Some people have no privacy boundaries and think they have entitled authority over you because they really want to help society or some BS, and when you meet them, you're like, "I'm sorry, who the F are you and why are you butting in?" Then there's me. If I'm butting in to solve a stranger's issue, like giving directions or shopping advice or speak up on behalf of someone or to do a job that's not my job description since it's technically someone else's job, it's because I've been there. I was shy and super timid and non-reactive and slow and nice, and I was afraid to speak up and was accommodating by self-sacrifice. And then I had a mental breakdown, a prolonged one. Result? I have zero patience. I mean, zero patience. I butt into other people's business like it's my own to solve crap for myself because I have no patience. It's either see people straggling and get upset, tell them to get their crap together and get upset again, or solve the issue myself and calm my nerves. Slowness makes me mad. Injustice makes me mad. Timid, shy people who can't stand up for themselves make me mad. I can't. I literally can't. Like, grow a spine. Yes, I know I was like this once. I know it's a hypocrite of me, but I know that I have anger issues. Story 39. They are totally awesome. Nothing defeats them. They keep their cool and composure and help and do all the things, and it's like nothing to them. You wonder, how do you do it? And they don't know what you're talking about. You stand there, this almost too chill or stoic person. Robin Williams comes to mind. Doesn't have to be, but never unloads their whiny bull crap because that crap is easy. I've done with the hard times. I still feel the soul-sucking nightmare, and because of that, I just want to party and have fun. And if it's not fun for someone else, immediately I'm compassionate and I lift those up around me even at my own expense, because what is an expense to you? Doesn't even scratch the surface of them. When you know, you know. They can tell each other apart and sometimes they can't, but it's all good. It's always all good, even when it isn't. That's how you can tell. Story 40. People who needed to analyze and read people a lot when they were younger, usually to try and keep the other person happy so they didn't get hurt. They will do the same thing with their friends. I do this because I grew up with abusive friendships and an abusive sister, and I realized it was an abuse thing when my friend with abusive parents said they did the same thing. We are quiet and we listen and watch more than we talk. We analyze people, look at how they react to things, look at how they act in certain circumstances. Multiple times I've accidentally weirded out a friend by knowing something about them that they didn't realize I'd paid attention to it. Once I explain I'm not stalking them or something, they understand, but every once in a while I accidentally catch them off guard. Story 41. You can't tell. Some signs are present in people who have basically normal lives. People who just can't handle anything, think their little things cause them to be hardcore or I've seen some crap type of person. I've known a ton of people who have really seen some crap. Nothing people say is true. People have BTDT sometimes talk about it, and sometimes don't. A guy I knew was calm as F when getting attacked and would just call him the likely coordinates like he was making callouts in a video game. He was with a dozen guys who all had the exact same experiences. There is no subtle signs that only or even mostly apply to people who have seen crap. The signs that are subtle are shared with people who haven't seen crap or had a bad day on their commute. For what it's worth, I have seen some crap. A large number of my friends have seen more. We all are unique in how we changed. I am hypervigilant while a buddy of mine just accepts anything as fate and doesn't do anything to protect himself 180 degrees from me. And we both have seen some crap. That's the reality. People are unique in the amount of adversity people can handle ranges, and their reactions to a specific level ranges. Story 42. Not entirely on this topic, but could potentially be a result of someone going through something. People who think a certain way often believe that others think like them. I'll give you an example. I dated someone who went through a rough period before when her fiance cheated on her with one of her friends. Unfortunately, this translated to her having a mistrust of me, using my password from a shared streaming service to log into other social media accounts of mine to spy on me. Ultimately, she was the one who acted this way to me. She turned into her own worst experience. If someone accuses you of something that isn't true, there's a very real chance that their behavior is actually something they've considered, if not doing, currently. Story 43. My fiance has had a hard life up until the last 5 years. When we got together, I helped him out of a horrible situation where he worked for a man who saved him when he was homeless and let him come stay at his home. My fiance ended up working for him as a diesel mechanic, and the man would work my fiance to death, have him working on crap until 2 a.m. and only paying $400 a week with no OT. His family is mostly narcissistic and treated him like crap his whole life. When I met him, he had so much anger. He quit drinking cold turkey when we had our daughter and has done a complete 180 except for the fact that he still has major trust issues. Not like he's jealous or doesn't trust me or my commitment to him, but if my family gives him money to help us out with something, they are very generous, giving people, and will help anyone in a bind. He thinks they're going to hold it over his head one day. Or if someone is genuinely kind or nice to him, he thinks they have an ulterior motive. I have a great sense of humor, at least I like to think so, and I joke with him a lot. However, it either goes over his head or gets offended thinking I'm being serious because growing up was not enjoyable for him. And I don't know that he's ever even laughed or joked around with his family at all. He is still working on himself and my family, which is his family too. And they tell him all the time how much they love him, appreciate him, and that he is our family now. And after 5 years, I think he still hasn't fully accepted it. Story 44. Yeah, it feels like there's a lot of romanticizing PTSD in this thread. Maybe it's a defense mechanism, but I feel it's very, very important to mention the traits someone with PTSD is liable to have that are much less romantic. Some people here might see described traits like introverted, analytical, dark humor, and strong in crisis and think they have PTSD, though I would strongly recommend considering the following traits before jumping to any conclusions. Cold empathy, a trait shared with what we generally call psycho or sociopaths. A strong ability to comprehend what a person is feeling without necessarily empathizing with them, even if that person is in dire need of social and emotional support. On the opposite side of the same coin, this might materialize as proactively seeking out people's deepest insecurities for later use. In case someone spurns the person with PTSD, then the person with PTSD could regain power in the scenarios quickly by emotionally attacking their perceived adversary in the most sensitive places. This could be their gender, their race, intelligence, appearance, mental illness, anything a person could feel insecure about. Violence. Hypervigilance isn't just having spider senses, it's a constant state of fight or flight. When you always feel like you're in a life-threatening situation, you struggle to control yourself and are much more likely to commit proactive acts of violence against people who may have just looked at you wrong. It can also be to assert a sort of dominance as a method of proactive self-protection, so others are scared to assault you. Repeating cycles of abuse. People with PTSD learn maladaptive behaviors, and even if they understand it is intensely negative, many almost cannot stop themselves. People who were beaten as children are much more likely to beat their own children. People who have been victimized in an abusive relationship are much more likely to seek out abusive partners and mimic abusive behavior against healthy ones. People who were forcefully prostituted are much more likely to proactively prostitute themselves. People who have been essayed as children are much more likely to grow up not just to be predators, but to essay children. Risk-taking behavior. While we conventionally see self-endangering behavior manifest as habitual overeating, alcohol abuse, or drug abuse, many people with PTSD will immediately endanger themselves and others by enacting extremely risky, seeming arbitrary behavior. Reportedly, one such behavior and would be driving over 100 miles per hour at night with the lights on one's vehicle off. One can think of behavior like this Russian roulette. Someone with PTSD might often engage in this self-endangering or self-destructive behavior. For some people without PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder might seem like a superhero origin story when we focus on seemingly positive side effects of the condition. Acute empathy, hypervigilance, heightened analytical thinking, strength in crisis, etc. However, PTSD isn't necessary to acquire these traits, and many people have attained them without the negative side effects of a destructive and painful illness. For those of us with PTSD, it can be comforting to know that there are some advantages may have resulted because of our traumas. There is strength in acknowledging how our experiences have made us stronger people. This fact, though, can coexist with the reality that PTSD is an illness that no one should have to face. And treatment of this condition does not mean a loss of one's ability or one's identity. Proper therapy and self-love will not compromise the strength that PTSD has coerced one into adapting. Instead, the healing process enhances the parts of us one might have thought was lost forever. If you're listening to this thread and you think you might be exhibiting signs of PTSD, please seek professional help before proceeding to self-treat and self-medicate. Do not be ashamed to seek a second opinion if you feel you haven't been taken seriously. A good therapist, preferably one with a specialty in trauma, cannot just save your life, but make life worth living again. Story 45. Reading through these comments, it feels like strangers talking about me in detail. I'm sure there are folks here who feel the same. It's not a good thing always to experience every ever-living F of a thing, but don't get to choose what you face sometimes. In my case, most times. These things, they leave scars and prevent you from living life normally, because every time you want to do something, you'll have immediate trust issues and PTSD. You still keep a brave face and go on because you don't want to ruin it for others who are just excited to do that thing. Being through some crap makes you strong on the outside, but it still leaves you very vulnerable on the inside. Sometimes that vulnerability is the only thing that is keeping you from being completely numb. Story 46. Wow, too many of these are on the dot for me. I understand why I don't like to be touched. The neighbor boy touched me inappropriately as a child. I've only recently been able to admit to myself that he SA'd me. But the others, I didn't realize that there was a reason I'm like that. I've been baffled for a while as to why I seem to be the only one who can remain calm in a bad situation. Why even my parents panic and I have to be the voice of reason and I calmly get through everything. It all makes sense now. Also, I could never understand why I forgot so much of my childhood. Some memories I know I've actively tried to push away and forget, but it really upsets me that in moments when I realize that I literally remember only bits of my younger years, like it happened to someone else, and I've forgotten the names and faces of most of my old classmates from school. I was bullied through school, so I was glad to graduate high school and walk away from them. My mom can't understand why when she updates me on so-and-so from old schools, I have no idea who she's talking about. She gets irritated and doesn't believe me, saying, "You went to school with them from kindergarten to 12th grade, but I honestly do not remember them until I look them up in a yearbook." I guess I know why now. Story 47. Not my experience, but my grandfather's. He was a Navy corpsman during the Korean War. One time, he and a few others volunteered to go ashore and help evacuate a forward MASH unit. This was right around the time that the United Nations force were pulling back from Incheon. It was supposed to be a quick and easy go to the unit, jump in the trucks, and drive back mission. When they made it to the MASH unit, there was nothing left. The enemy forces had driven some sort of heavy vehicle. My grandfather always said it was tanks over the MASH unit, crushing nearly everyone inside. Those that escaped were shot and then run over again. When they got back to Incheon, my grandfather and his buddies found that their ship had left them behind. They ended up being folded into any number of assorted military combat units heading towards Busan, Korea. He saw combat in 4 of the largest battles during the war. When I was considering joining the armed forces, eventually decided against it. He used to always tell me, if you end up going to war and you come back to your camp for the night, never look your buddies in the eye. I never really believed him until he told the stories of Allied men getting into fights and killing each other after making eye contact. He explained that it was their signal to kill, and when you looked into their eyes, it was like flipping a switch. Instant combat mode. He had a lot of other stories, but this is getting long, so I'll wrap with one last one. Whenever my aunt would invite him to go hunting, he declined. Why? Because he didn't think he could handle hearing those sounds. Sounds he experienced on the battlefields of Korea when animals would wander into the battlefields or into minefields and get injured. And the best thing he could do for them was put them out of their misery. Story 48. Kindness and understanding to others in hard situations. I can't stand seeing other people suffer or be in pain. It's my least favorite thing in the world. I'm the dad friend who will call a crisis check on you. I did this for a couple friends recently, coached them into getting better therapists, and they're now doing better. And I'll listen to you and vent about your new mental illnesses, diagnoses, and I won't ever judge you. Even if we haven't talked in forever, I don't care. I'm just glad you're okay. I'm friends with every kind of person. Everything sucks, and just being nice and supportive to other people feels right. My childhood was described to me as being like a child called it, just without the attempted murder and with a lot more SA. I left home to be homeless at 19, and I'm 32 now. For what it's worth, I know my limits and I don't burn myself out on other people anymore. Everything in balance and within reason. I had to learn that one the hard way. Story 49. I learned something like this about myself due to the shocked reactions. In this case, it was taking a sucker punch when I was in middle school. Me and this other kid were arguing the whole PE period, messing with each other. Anyways, at some point it gets physical. He pushes me, I push him. Seems like a fight is over though. I turn to walk away. Friend tells me to look out and the guy sucker punches me surprisingly hard in the back of the head. I felt it, but didn't flinch. I just kept walking. Sure, everyone thought I was the baddest dude for it, but really, I just taken so many punches at that age by someone much larger and stronger than me that it never affected me. I got annoyed with everyone asking if I was alright because why wouldn't I be? At the time, I understood that everyone's parents treated them the same. They were shocked I had gone back to myself so quickly. It took me 6 to 7 more years to realize most people's fathers didn't punch them in the back of the head when they made a mistake. Story 50. A big sign could be laughing inappropriately. There are people who survive serious trauma through laughter. It can seem manic or even insensitive, but if you've seen that laugh, you know. Trauma, particularly at a young age, can be so deep that it seems normal and can distort your perceptions of personal boundaries and muddy or completely blind your view of how others might feel. Essentially, because empathy depends on putting yourself in someone else's shoes, your standards of normalcy affect your ability to relate to others. So, something that to the rest of us draw out instant concern or paternal feelings can seem hilarious too, even if they care about that person. Story 51. From my own personal experience in life, 1. Sarcastic, cynical gallows humor and massively self-deprecating. 2. Avoiding confrontations and or going far out of my way to compromise to another viewpoint and to avoid a fight. 3. Taking any criticism as a huge attack that just shuts me down emotionally. Even simple questions can be mistaken for criticism and I will immediately try to explain and defend why I didn't do it or it didn't happen, etc. 4. Massive trust issues. 5. Hating having any attention, good or bad, to the point of hating even praise at work or having a birthday party with friends and family, yet at the same time desperately wanting such praise and craving acceptance by peers. 6. Major issues keeping in touch with what's left of my family. 7. Still uncomfortable talking on the phone after a childhood where phone calls from friends led to abuse from the parents. Mind you, I'm in my 40s now. 8. Very hesitant to ever share deep personal feelings or interest with anyone. I can't be hurt with it if I don't share it, and I carefully control what aspects of my life and personality I share. I won't even share such things with my therapist. So yeah, I'm pretty effed up due to my crappy life experiences and childhood trauma. Just writing that out was painful for me to admit to strangers online. Cheers. Story 52. They have poor social memory. Can't remember people's names or faces even if they've met them before. They maintain a distance. Like when a group of friends are together, they will be the ones staying the furthest away. You talk to them for years already but realize you know almost nothing about their background. They always bring up and think about ways things can go wrong and have a plan to counter them. There are more signs, but I believe they were already written here before. And most importantly is the aura. You can just feel if someone has gone through heck, and I think I don't have to explain this one. Story 53. I had a female friend who was pretty tough, but typical party, nightlife, loving person with no immediate signs of having been through some crap. Until I saw her switch 180 with our friend who was absolutely hammered, helping him collect all his belongings. Google Mapsing his route home and putting his jacket on. I started to notice that she was fiercely protective of people on nights out and had a very maternal side that I hadn't recognized before. We chatted about it and I learned that she'd been in foster care as a young child, had an abusive mother, and had essentially raised her little brother. Being at university had freed her from these responsibilities, but she still couldn't help herself when she saw people in need. It might have just been a habit, but I couldn't help but feel she was showing a care and protection to others that she wishes others had shown to her as a child. Story 54. Emotionally astute. Very good at reading body language and emotional state and can respond appropriately. Had a friend who had been in foster care, then grew up back with her abusive mother and basically raised her younger brother. She could read people like no one I've ever met and gave the best, most insightful advice I've ever heard. She was the go-to. She just seemed to know how to help and was both supportive and logical in dealing with any problem we brought to her. The way she could deconstruct actions, feelings, and situations to show motive and emotion on both sides was unparalleled. When I found out about her childhood and she explained that she had to do it to survive, she had to be able to make instant, accurate assessments of her mom's mood and state to avoid getting beaten and bullied and to protect her brother. Story 55. I scrolled around for a good amount of time and thought I'd share my experience too. For context, I was SA'd as a child. Had loving parents for 11 years that just turned extremely toxic for no apparent reason one day. Bullied to the point where I was about to self-unalive and just strangers being generally too personal and weird with me. It seems like an exaggeration, I know. There was a period of time where I would cry over everything. I was just around 11 years old. Something as trivial as having my handwriting not being the way I liked it made me tear up. Then all of a sudden I just stopped. Like I was amid one of my usual "why don't people love me" crises when one moment there was an effing river in my face and the next moment it was gone. I just can't cry anymore. Even to something I want to, no tears. Yes, I did see a doctor, nothing wrong. The emotional response is mostly just no more. What's next? Oh yeah, I am absurdly and overly attached to material things, simple things like pens, coins, etc. You could kill my brother and I would brush it off, but you dare take my favorite pen and I'll hunt you down for the rest of your life. Being afraid of confrontation. I can never ever stand an argument. I break into sweat, My heart starts thumping and I get easily scared. I don't know how to describe it, but if I'm in an inferior position, like sitting down while someone is standing over me yelling, I cannot. I find it hard to be still. I just don't know. Something that goes along with that is being scared of a person. I can never stay with my mother alone. There has to be someone else. I remember 2 years ago, my mother was so sick from COVID, the doctor said she had 30 to 70% chance of living to dying. Everyone was taking time to talk with her on the phone, and I urged someone to stay with me, even on the call. She thankfully survived, and yes, I said thankfully. I want to love her, I just don't know how. Also, being awkward around people you care for. Like, there's a friend of mine who I'm so close to, I can't properly state it. But still, for the life of me, I can't bring up the courage to do so much as put my arm around his shoulder and sit close to him. I feel like it's something is physically stopping me from getting closer. Around other people, I'm the polar opposite. People often ask me how I can be so confident around new people. Probably one of my favorites is hypersensitivity and insane reaction speeds. I can easily intercept my environment in fractions of a second, always am prepared for an emergency exit from what? Who cares? I can pick up sounds better than anyone I know. How am I a city-level champion at dodgeball and racing? Yeah, that didn't come from experience for sure. They're like little superpowers I have, the only thing that consoles me at all. And last, seeing younger kids and feeling jealous. The realization that I have forever lost those years, that my gone childhood will never be normal, that I couldn't enjoy life as a kid and literally anyone and everyone else I see has. Those are the only moments when a tear comes up. Story 56. Tend to be quite reserved, not often letting their emotions show past surface level things like amusement or mild irritation. A lot of patience and a large temper, at least for me. Don't tend to talk much about stuff that's happened to them and will change the subject very subtly to avoid it, sometimes without realizing it. If they do talk about it, there's a good chance they'll say what happened without emotionally connecting with it, sticking to factual stuff instead of how they felt about it. It was bad instead of I felt awful. Tend to be able to be empathetic and good at emotional support, sometimes a bit distant, often lacking a bit of self-worth if you dig deeper. Story 57. Many people will pick up on a colleague or friend who is seemingly able to guess what others are feeling or thinking in the moment based on subtle behaviors and social cues. After that realization, they'll notice the colleague and friend is monitoring these signs almost constantly. What's harder to recognize is how that process is applied in other contexts. For example, a safe driver will be looking in their mirrors regularly and checking on ramps as they pass them. If asked, they can usually describe the car immediately behind them without looking. The behavior of a hyper-vigilant driver won't look that much different than a safe driver. However, if asked, they can often describe several cars behind them without looking and will have drawn conclusions about the driver. There's a blue car behind me, a semi in the right lane further back, and that dummy with a death wish in the black SUV who's been sitting in the semi's blind spot for like 5 miles. There's of course a lot of variability, but broadly speaking, the very observant person probably has or had a reason to closely monitor their environment for the threat. Story 58. Not wanting to accept gifts. A friend of mine doesn't like to accept gifts, financial support, or any other sort of big assistance. Another friend got kind of annoyed about it, thinking he was being stubborn or ungrateful, so I explained that more than likely our friend doesn't want to help because of his questionable upbringing and bad family experiences. Kindness, more often than not, always came with a catch. A gift in order to forgive a previous wrong or to turn a blind eye to mistreatment. We did this nice thing for you, so you better love us. That sort of thing. Essentially, I theorized that gifts and acts of kindness became a negative association, like bribery or a sense of expectation. There were no presents in childhood, only obligations. The upset friend became more understanding afterwards. And yes, speaking from experience, took me years to be able to accept gifts without dread or, what's the catch, anxiety myself. I'm doing better now in that regard at least. Story 59. Adapting. Like it has been said before, they don't need much time to react. When I've heard the news about my dad being killed at his flat, expected, but still, was a great weekend before that. I came there with 2 friends and was the only one who, 1, called the police before arriving. Thanks for not coming, felt very safe. 2, asked 2 different people to call the police if we are not answering our phones more than for 3 minutes. 3, pressed the 7 button despite the flat was on 8. Who knows, Dad could have went off the rails and decided to kill me and whoever comes with me just because he got too drunk the day before. Needed to explain this to the people who were with me, i.e. why 7 isn't at 8, and had to comfort another friend then. I told her the story. Funny part is that day still was just another Saturday. Gosh, I hate comforting people who burst out crying while I'm telling this story. This whole story sounds very dramatic, but I feel like we're missing key context here. I hope you're doing okay. Story 60. This is the biggest thing I've noticed about myself as a person who has very much seen some crap. I can act suddenly really weirded out or disgusted by things that are otherwise wholesome to other people. Disney movies where the message is how special and important the love of one's family is, for example, absolutely nauseates me because my family was very abusive all my life and used to use this "family's supposed to always love each other" bullcrap to make me feel bad and tolerated. Encanto actually makes me so mad the way the family shows the surface level signs of more severe abuse, but they end up just singing away all their issues like it's nothing. What a terrible thing to teach children. No real family would ever heal effectively with a few 1-minute ditty. Naive couples posting about how much they love each other make me sad and uncomfortable because I've had so many toxic relationships and get the feeling that it's all too likely one will cheat or abuse or assault the other. People in their high school years ranting about how their friends are going to always be friends forever and ever and nothing will ever change for them. I've also had many friendships that felt like that, and they all fell apart. As a matter of fact, anytime I feel this close to someone that I think of it, and I think it could last forever, I get very anxious that I'm about to get badly hurt. Virtually anyone saying they fully trust anyone makes me mad. If you notice a friend getting stiff and upset at the mention of what should be nice or wholesome thing, it's definitely because something happened to them. Someone really hurt them. Someone they loved and trusted the way those people do in that wholesome situation. Man, why they have to bring up Encanto? This is a very serious thread. We don't talk about Bruno, no, no, no. It's stuck in my head now. Story 61. It's all in the eyes, man. This sounds weird and maybe a little creepy, but when I meet a woman, I can scan her eyes constantly to see how she reacts to the world. If she shows mistrust to certain things, lack of enthusiasm for certain things, and a general wariness for trifling things. Basically, an intelligent sense of apathy for a pursuit of plastic commercialism. I know we can have a decent conversation. The longer she stares at me without blinking, the longer she makes me wait for an intelligent answer, the more respect I have for the life she's lived. No varnish, no attempt to please me or maintain an atmosphere, just a general sense that we're both watching the world pass by, and it's sad, effing sad. That's where honesty begins. This isn't hard to find in certain circles, and it saves me from babysitting an adult in a relationship. She doesn't need to top my trauma, but I need to know my past is not the first train wreck she's thought about. I don't want to be the most interesting thing that's happened to her because oftentimes that opens up a partner up to a manufactured sense of distance, unrelatability. If she clearly doesn't go to the trouble to match, say, an annoying salesman energy, or if she narrows her eyes around the time when I also sense BS, she has my attention. If she's angry and it shows with a glare, not acquiescence or a mask, then she might have just have her own sense of power. A powerful woman shows her face, in my opinion, and I want to see those eyes communicate. Show me someone who looks at the world when they feel they're up to it, and I'll show you a wise person. Story 62. As someone who has been through some crap, I've realized more often than not when there's a hard decision to be made or a difficult situation at hand, the most common sense solution is usually the only solution. I let people try other stuff, but usually it's the most obvious solutions that people don't want to do. For example, I had a dog get ran over while at work. I didn't want to or couldn't, completely understandable, and they wanted to take it to the vet when I got home. Needless to say, the dog was in no shape and likely was in immense pain. I'm not going to get into it, but I put the dog down and buried them. It was the most straightforward solution and likely the only solution. I won't get into details, but when they described it, I knew there was no way the dig would make it. I've lost a lot of people and I've made the wrong choice more times than I can count. Story 63. What is this thread? I'm guessing a lot of you aren't very self-aware. Sign is constant meltdowns over almost anything. With all the medication, therapy, and years worth of research, I feel myself getting worse and worse as I get older. No one wants to be around me because though they don't see my emotional outburst, they can feel it. I can feel it, hovering just below my skin, ready to break out like hives at any given moment. I'm angry, very effing angry all the time. I'm incredibly sweet, will do anything for anyone, but the millisecond you cross me, I make it my life's mission to become your personal nightmare. I hate being mean, I loathe it, but I'm really good at it. Learned from the best. I'm turning my everything I promised myself I would be, and I resent others incredibly quickly. My heart literally breaks every freaking day. It's devastating. I can't allow myself to go numb because I am the type of person I will do some effing crap. I move with a sense of militant anguish. Story 64. Well, if I should speak of myself, in about 1 year I lost half of my family. My dad, my two cousins, my one grandpa, my two grandmas, an aunt, and an uncle. My cousin, he served in the Ukrainian army, was severely injured with no chance to survive, and still he wasn't left in the hospital knowing that he would die, in great pain. So he has been mercy killed to die with euthanasia, not in the pain of bullets. My grandma died in pain too, cancer. Then she could feel that she would die and died in a scream which I heard myself. I rushed to her to look up what happened and I just saw her gone. I'm about my age, well, I'm under 16, don't want to tell more, male, in case that matters, and all I do after that is simply be quiet. Sometimes on late nights I would almost cry, but I can't. I just lost all my feelings somehow, or I feel them extremely badly. Basically, like in one example, if someone never smiles and talks with only a few people or no one at all, you know something bad must have happened to them. Story 65. I used to work with lads who had come out of young offenders institutes, juvie. It's hard to put my fingers on specifics, but they were hyper aware of their surroundings. If a new person entered the area, they would size them up. Initially, they were careful with their words and actions. If they were shown kindness and trusted you, they would be fiercely loyal, sometimes jumping up ready to fight someone they thought who might have shown disrespect to me. We would get them jobs at Domino's or similar places, and initially they would be model employees. But they carried this hypervigilance around that verged on paranoia, and their ability to handle that contributed to whether they could rinse the prison out of their lives. If they could relax in society outside prison, they were usually okay. If they couldn't, they usually end up getting in a fight with a colleague or a manager, and things would often spiral out of control, although not always. An understanding manager would really help. One of them said, a bullied kid sees everything and remembers everything from school, which tells you about where you are in society if you are in a constant state of hypervigilance. Story 66. For me personally, I almost avoid eye contact when someone is upset. I can't bring myself to look at someone for longer than a split second. I hang my head and stay silent. Sometimes I try to find something nearby to occupy my hands with out of nervousness. My mom was extremely mean to me growing up, and I could not defend myself or I'd be punished. She acted like she wanted me to say something but not at the same time, and the punishment from staying quiet and not looking at her was always less than standing up for myself. I have trouble keeping eye contact always because of ADHD, but it's impossible to even force it when someone is mad. With time, it's been getting a little better because now I'm not a kid anymore. My mom doesn't act so horribly to me, but it's still very much there, and I still feel a strong urge to curl up in a ball even if I could feel I could talk to the person who is mad. With others, I notice being apologetic when they say anything personal, especially if it's about something negative, like saying sorry for troubling me with their issues. When I've shown time and time again I'm fine with discussing that stuff, or if I've asked them what was wrong. I mean, I do the same thing, lol. People who don't feel cared for or spent a long time feeling that way and are still trying to get past it. I notice a lot of things, but this is the most common issue. Story 67. I can understand much of this situation. I've been out of work for 2 years now because I finally broke, so I will relate one story. I worked a production job. I was often under heavy pressure. The hours we worked could vary depending on need. 6:30 a.m. to 3 p.m. was the standard. 5 a.m. to as late as 7 p.m. was the exception. Some of the members of our group were very sneaky. An example would be they had a high payout, hours earned, job on Monday and created too many hours. So they'd only call in enough hours to cover Monday, then push the excess work hours out of sight, only to suddenly pull the hidden work out again when they were having a bad day. I, on the other hand, was honest. I called in all my work every day, good or bad. I became a go-to guy. My boss would come to me and say, I need you to pick up the pace because employee A is going to come up short today. Essentially, he then put in employee A as having worked in my station, which they did not do, for as many hours as they needed to correct their failing. And I'm off topic, but you get an idea how I felt I was no more than a thing to be used by my boss's coworkers and benefits. So this one afternoon rolls around, right? My area was a two-man operation. Jay is working with me. I do not like Jay for many reasons, but work with him as subpar help is better than no help, am I right? Oftentimes, Jay's first question of the day was, how little can we get away with producing today? Anyway, Jay starts pushing me about starting early the next morning. He wanted to start early and leave early because it was Friday and he had the weekend off. I told him it was a no-go. I told him the boss often gave me heck for starting early, especially if he, the boss, had no need for essaying me of my excess production on that particular day. Jay kept pushing. He had a reputation for playing the "it's better to ask forgiveness than permission" game. I finally caved. I told Jay, all right, I'll take a chance and start at 5:15 a.m. Friday. My boss walks up to me and proceeds to give me heck for starting early when he felt it wasn't necessary. Jay is standing 3 feet away from both of us. I take my verbal beating, hoping Jay will step in and admit he pressured me into the situation, but I say nothing to my boss, but that I understand and I'm sorry for my transgression. My boss walks away. I look at Jay. 5:15 and I'm defeated. I just want to walk out and never return. Jay looks at me and says, sorry about that, but you are right in that he seems to hold you to a different standard than the rest of us. Jay could have spoken up, but he didn't. I could have called Jay out, but I didn't. It was a glaring red flag I've carried since childhood when my mother would scream at me for the slightest transgression. It was a red flag I'd carried since my younger days when my mother would ask why I'd done something or not done something. I could never get past "I thought" in those situations before she'd start screaming, "You thought? You thought? You never think!" Oftentimes during the screaming there was this finger, and she'd jab her finger into my chest to accentuate her words, sometimes so hard she'd nearly knock me off my feet. So what I'm saying here, watch folks react to a stressful situation. Watch them take a verbal beating. Watch them crumble and the lights in their eyes die out. And know oh so many times that it is not their lack that leads to this behavior, but that the best of them has been stolen, beaten, bullied out of them. Story 68. If it isn't guaranteed to kill me when it goes wrong, it scares me. When it does guarantee death, when it does go wrong, it doesn't scare me. In fact, I prefer it. I mean, I don't have to just about survive and hang on for dear life again because that is the scary part for me. So I run away from danger because I have a chance of surviving instead of, like most people, because I might die. I also pick up on sounds or behaviors in my surroundings other people don't seem to notice. I've been told it looks like I don't get nervous in really dangerous situations. In reality, I am, but I focus on analyzing the situation and trying to figure out my options and their likely consequences so I can react quickly when crap does hit the fan. I used to look for two things when I entered any room. First of all, every potential exit, and secondly, everything I could use as a weapon. I stopped doing the latter. If I can, I still like to look at those fire exit floor plans. It gives me a rough layout of the floor and instantly a couple of potential exits. Story 69. Very possessive of their things, even items that seem minor. Grew up very poor at one point and any item became important. Bad habits with food like possessive, hoarding, binging, etc. Getting really upset if you sneak up behind them, like not a playful scare, just someone walking behind them, catching them off guard, and they get disproportionately upset. I have PTSD and my husband purposely tries to be loud if he's walking behind me because it throws me into a panic if I don't realize it. I either immediately try to punch him or fall to the ground and hyperventilate. If they never let you go to their house but you went to their house all the time, I stayed the night at my friends' houses all the time but they never stayed at mine. I was super embarrassed and came up with every excuse in the book for why they couldn't come inside at all, not even when they dropped me off. Story 70. Insecurity, feeling dumb, overthinking everything, worrying about others' will instead of your own, stuttering a lot in stressful situations, can't say a full sentence without cracking 100 times. I've had all of this while growing up and still have these problems to this day. And I'm a male, 27. When I was a kid, I would be called dumb multiple times just because I made a very small mistake. Being yelled at because I didn't do something in a particular order the way that somebody else does. Dad calling me a junkie and a goat as a joke when I came back from the barber shop. He didn't like my short hair, so he made fun of me. Also calling me things when I started to grow my beard out. Issues with my brother as well, fights every single day. It drives me crazy. He is my biggest problem. You can't do anything right in his eyes. One small mistake and he unleashes heck on earth to you. These things caused me a lot of problems at internships, sometimes at school and now at work. I don't have friends, so I don't hang out. Story 71. I was in the Army, and my generation, the older generation, post 9/11 status and Vietnam veterans, are the people I've talked to. You can't tell. You can't tell at all with vets. I've only noticed it's when you talk about military crap that people are like, I don't know how to explain it. My military generation did mostly rotational deployments. The generation before was post 9/11 and was in the Middle East when crap was happening. Then before you have the generations of old school, then Vietnam. When you ask people about it, they effing change, man. You see some crap that makes you feel like an a-hole for even asking. I felt stupid right in a room with post 9/11 dudes because I look up to those people. I was a kid back when, and hearing them talk and going back was like hardcore, like crap was about to go down again. Like imagine you're sitting around a campfire telling ghost stories on steroids. That's how the crap felt for me. But maybe that's because I was in, so yeah, I don't know. Story 72. I go camping a few hours away several times a year. I go to the same campground I've been going to for 10 years. The owners know me by name and we usually set aside some time to shoot the crap and catch up. This year she was just empty. Her neck of the woods is rough living. It's the definition of BFE. She's 2 years younger than me but looks 10 years older. She looked really rough this time and for good reason. Just before Thanksgiving her house burned down. They're so rural, all fire respond is from volunteer department. They had 3 volunteer departments respond plus the nearest large town. The first truck and tanker got there in 30 minutes and ran dry before the next one showed. Her husband and his dad died in January from COVID, huge hospital bills. Her son took over the business end of their 5 businesses, so he couldn't do his normal job of getting the campgrounds ready. The spring flood took much of their main riverside campground infrastructure, bathroom, shower, some electrical boxes with it. Then the electric company came on and said 1/3 of their poles were damaged and had to be cut off of the grid. All the campground businesses were fully under his and his dad's name. He didn't have a recent will, so she only got shared ownership of 1 campsite. In March, insurance denied her house fire claim, and she'd been living in an RV by the river. She didn't say why, but she did all of this like she was talking about a mediocre sandwich. Story 73. Here are some of mine that are maybe not so obvious as signs of my PTSD, along with what I think is the cause. I am very easily startled by a sudden loud noise. Probably because most of my childhood, my mother and stepfather would leave at night and come home at 4 a.m. super drunk and would often fight. They would scream and slam things and fairly often throw dishes at each other. I also tend to jump when I don't realize someone is behind me, possibly due to my older siblings enjoying scaring me as a kid. May have started before then, and that's why I would get so scared. Mostly standard sibling stuff like jumping out from behind things and yelling, though my sister would often chase me around our house with knives when we were home alone. I usually am very perceptive of sounds like footsteps, the tone of people's voices, or even just loud sounds, clearly related to all the other things. Another, which I figure is fairly common, but that is likely assumed to just be prudishness, would be moderate to severe discomfort being around people that are drinking or drunk. Definitely caused by the fact that my mother and her family were and are all raging alcoholics, along with the first situation I mentioned. Despite all that, I can also be strangely calm when I need to be. If everyone else is freaking out, some part of my brain switches and I will just do what needs to be done without the fear, anxiety, or stress that I would normally have in such a situation. Story 74. I have lots of pent-up emotions just like anyone else, but because of that, I'll simply just, oh, okay, and stare off into nothingness till someone hugs me. But even then, I can't show emotion like I would if I saw a baby playing with a puppy. It'll take me months to finally cry, get angry, even laugh about the moment. An aunt of mine passed away from COVID, and I guess since I rarely saw her or wasn't there for her burial, it hadn't clicked that she was gone. About 4 months passed and I logged into my old Facebook and came across my cousin's profile, aunt's daughter. I saw a picture of my aunt, beautiful as ever, and the caption said, "Rip Mama." That's where I lost it, and I was angry because I wasn't there and then sad. But of course no one knows that, and they'll never know. Not because I don't care, but growing up I was told to suck it up when I cried or anything else. Telling a child to not show their emotions truly F's them up later on. Story 75. Never talking to people, but in a different way than an introvert. Less out of not having social energy or just being introverted, and more out of fear that you'll do something wrong. or fear that once you get close, they'll be pulled out of your life, just like the last 10 to 15 times. I think that goes with it scanning every public space for the most isolated and out of view seat so you don't have to talk to anyone or get noticed. Another one is just a lack of emotion. Some people have felt so much that they just shut off their emotions so they don't have to feel anymore. A couple people mentioned it is what it is. Another good one is not putting yourself forward or feeling weird about asking for stuff. Flinching or saying sorry for everything is also a good one. Story 76. Minimizing your own needs. I was neglected most of my childhood and always told I was fine. I caught COVID late August of last year. I ran 102, 103 fever for a week while continuing to take care of the house and the teenager. Kid's mom wanted me to go to the hospital, but I kept having crap happen. No gas, then low coolant, then low oil. My mother, who I lived with, never once offered to take me or pick up the slack around the house. My ex ended up sending me gas money and demands to go to the ER. Come to find out I had pneumonia, as well as my oxygen levels were sitting at 86%. I was stuck in the hospital for a week and sent home on oxygen at 27 years old. I thank my lucky stars I didn't end up on a vent. Similar is when I got dehydrated in the 8th grade. It was July, and I was teeth chattering cold with the window open, fleece PJs, fleece blanket, and a regular blanket on. I also had a severe headache, where I couldn't turn it more than a few inches without it hurting. I was told to take a shower and ended up spending 3 days in a pitch black bedroom at my grandma's. Story 77. I have no idea how to carry myself, but other people have asked me if I've gone through some crap based on how I interact with them. I really haven't, nothing crazy at least. I was just the least parented kid, but by no means ignored. I used to be friends with a guy who had a way worse upbringing than me, and he used to comment on how completely untroubled I was with whatever was happening around me. Someone could be in my face yelling, or I could be watching something go wrong, or someone would reach out for help, and I'd always be the first one to volunteer, and never lost my cool. He once asked me what I was actually thinking about when something had happened, and I gave him an extremely detailed and honest response, but that broke his brain even more, because I described the roiling self-doubt and aggravation that I felt, but my face and body language revealed no trace of it. Story 78. When they become the better of themselves, it's noticeable. I have a friend who's been through a lot, and he wouldn't talk to us, ghosting everyone for months and coming back seemingly better. The longest time she ghosted us was for almost a year, when she came back almost a different person. Although the same loudmouth and messy eater, that's when she shared her problems. Kudos to her self-worth and mindset. Said she didn't want to share her problems unless she solves it. We don't know what she went through, trying to understand and accept. It's her way of solving her problems. But we know now and why she had solved her problems. Her mindset is utterly amazing, considering she's the youngest among us. How is she so optimistic about change and knowledge despite what comes with? Kudos to you, my girl. I love you so much. Story 79. I have a weird one from myself. I don't know where exactly it came from, but I have a history of being bullied in school and being bullied and betrayed and physically assaulted, a random punch on the shoulder here and there, out of nowhere, things like that by so-called friends. So maybe it stems from that, I don't know. I'm not feeling comfortable sitting down when entering an unfamiliar room with mostly unfamiliar people. When I'm getting invited to sit at the table with them, I'm politely declining and mostly stand behind them, facing the whole table at once, basically being at the shortest distance to the door of all people. I only have the back facing the door constantly as long as everyone stays at the table and the trusted persons are in the room. I get a feeling of strong unease or slight restlessness, or a feeling that the situation is being not as predictable as desired when the trusted person leaves the room for a short moment. That's how I realized that something's wrong in my head, as my new, non-abusive, at least to me, they're peace and respectful, their family still is often hurling slurs and insults at each other. Friends started to point it out to me, but I never found it too weird before that. Just never felt that sitting down is what I wanted to do at this moment. Story 80. Here's one lesser known ones as I picked up from adult children of emotionally immature parents. They over-intellectualize their interests, meaning that when you talk to them, they seem to ramble about something they like ad nauseum. For instance, everyone has had that friend who knows everything about a topic, like say Magic the Gathering or even birdwatching, and every conversation somehow leads back to that interest. Maybe they're even known for it. Oh yeah, that's Charlie, he's the Pokemon guy. Dude could probably recite the Poke Rap from memory and has played every game like 5 times. That person has likely been emotionally stunted by their parents. They don't like intimacy because they probably never got it as a child and it effed them up, whether they know it or not. They might also have had other things happen in their life to compound these issues. They might not even notice it's had an effect on them. I didn't. As a result, they dive into these subjects to 1. Give themselves some level of engagement on a personal level, but just not with a person, and 2. Build up some kind of value and personality around the topic because they can't self-reflect enough to develop that on their own. They need that superficial foundation because they're scared to look inward. If they become parents themselves, they'll likely have a hard time building intimacy with their own kid, and the cycle will continue. I actually think a lot of people self-diagnose themselves as being on the autism spectrum. Because of this, hyper-focusing on an interest is a common symptom, but in reality, they just see hobbies as safer to deeply engage with than other people. For the record, I say that as a person who drew all these examples from my own personal tendencies. I'm terrified to raise a kid because I struggle with intimacy a lot and don't want to F a child up. Story 81. When people have this combo of traits, 1, loads of self-interest, like an unhealthy amount. You might either think they're arrogant or know everything, but it's actually just basic level competence with no mastery, but an absolute crapload of different things. 2, they tell what they think of as a funny story and everyone apologizes to them. 3, scared of things that don't make sense to other people. Sometimes they stare into space. 4, seem fine for days. They take lots of stress for days on end with no reaction. And they blow up and storm out because you asked what time it is while they were listening to the same song they have played 100 times again. 5, might say something really effed up and they don't even know it's effed up. 6, they don't like horror films. 7, you are pretty sure that if they saw an adult hurt a child, they would beat that adult half to death. 8, they are loud when frustrated with people they care about, but get quiet and calm when they're upset at someone else. Story 82. Making dark jokes? Me and my friends are always joking about our trauma and mental health. I know so many people who do this too. Whenever you offer stuff and they don't want to accept it or keep asking, "Are you sure?" over and over, apologizing over things they shouldn't be, trust issues or second guessing things that they are told they have to verify it before believing, not batting an eye when bad things happen and have the "it is what it is" kind of attitude, being super understanding about things that most people wouldn't be so patient about. They people please, and they don't stand up for themselves. Story 83. Physical scars. For the most part, this is going to be a throwaway. In my particular instance, I've had a burn scar on my left leg from my knee all the way down to my shin. Among many other things that happened, it always had a negative, lasting impact on my mental state and my personal view of myself even to this day. For the better part of over a decade, I've had to wear jeans or anything that covered the entirety of my legs because I was so incredibly self-conscious about my scar at the time, due to bullying and disdainful looks and attitudes that people gave me in public. Thankfully, as I've gotten older, I really stopped caring for the most part about what people thought about the scar. But from time to time, I still feel a little self-conscious when I wear shorts in public, and I still occasionally get disgusted looks from other people. Story 84. My childhood was very different than yours, I'm assuming. Abuse and torture was normalized in school and very accepted. I'm talking about concepts like the hurting will stop when you stop being disabled type of deal. Carpeting the walls of the little room that they took me in to restrain me because the screams they would sit on my spine and twist my wrist were bothering the other children in other classrooms. It's hard to put into words, but I remember when I finally got out, I had no idea how to relate to anyone. Not only that, but I would see the behavior of kids and think that I would be punished severely for that kind of behavior, or that someone needed to hurt them. I remember I was working and a coworker told me she never saw me smile. It's not that I didn't have emotions, I guess I just learned not to show them since I'd be punished. I still don't know how to relate to most people because they will talk about their lives and growing up, and that was just not my experience. So yeah, I'd definitely say not showing the level of emotion that is usual to a certain amount, that and giving odd answers. Sometimes people that are off aren't really off, they're just traumatized and weren't lucky enough to live a life as blessed as yours. Story 85. I shot a recruitment video for a company for which I work. One of the women who was working in customer service role was the subject of our day in the life docuseries style video. She mentioned that one of the things she liked about the gig was that it allowed her to buy groceries. We were out to lunch at a Chinese restaurant in her town on break, and the food wasn't very good. I had leftovers, but I was traveling for this job and didn't have a fridge in my hotel room. She said, "Tiny sideburns, you're not going to eat that?" I said no. She asked, "You're not going to take it with?" I told her I didn't have a fridge for leftovers, so she took it. It dawned on me right then that she was someone who experienced a lot of food insecurity in her life, just by the sincere zeal with what she said. I'm not normally a wasteful person, but it was one of those reminders in life to be ever so grateful for all that I have and never take it for granted. Story 86. As someone who's been alone most of their life and had to always figure it out quickly, I have 2 emergency go bags at all times. I don't trust anyone, even friends I've known for 10 plus years or family. I hide a lot of stuff from everyone. I'll never get rid of my storage units. One has clothing and gear, other has canned foods and emergency food and kits and so on. Every time I walk into a place, I'm looking for the exit and a weapon just in case things go down. I love people and love to socialize, but never hang on to new people because I'm afraid to build an attachment and be let down or let them down. I would rather die than to ever depend on anyone ever. I smile and try my hardest to make everyone laugh, but go on a drug binge twice a year to escape from my emotions. I live very frugally, although I'm considered upper class, to keep a low profile. Even my family and friends don't know this. I moved into my car, and it's been almost 2 years since I want to be ready to always go just in case to save money, but also to prepare for unknown situations. I've spent a lot of my life from childhood to adulthood being moved around or living in different places, so I've always made sure to have duplicates of my favorite and most important things and go bags just in case I have to flee. I picked up most of these habits from my mother. There's a lot more, but my main ones. Story 87. Assuming the worst about someone's situation. This is especially true of someone with sheltered trauma, where they had a crazy messed up childhood and don't fully realize just how bad it was. One of my coworkers and I were making small talk a while ago, and she asked if I had any siblings. I told her that there are 5 of us kids total. Her next question was if I had been raised in a cult. She went from 4 siblings to me being a cult kid instantly. Kinda threw me for a loop. So I just told her no, my parents are just very horny. I am too, but that's another story. Turned out her childhood was an absolute dumpster fire. Both parents were alcoholics, so she spent a lot of time with her grandmother, who was also an abusive POS and tried to poison her when she was younger, and may or may not have been involved with her grandfather's disappearance. Also, probable essay as well. Story 88. Gaze, it is always in the eyes. I don't know how to explain it, but usually there's a look that is simultaneously dead and alive, like a dead intensity. I've never been in a war or combat or military, but I've regularly had veterans and servicemen come up to me and ask what I've seen. I've also been told that my eyes are intense. Sometimes I have to consciously try to soften them so I don't throw people off or make them feel unsettled. If memory lives in the eyelids, then people who have been through some crap tend to keep our eyes open, just to keep horrors from reanimating in our memory, even through a prolonged blink. Story 89. People who flinch at normal things. I remember my ex-girlfriend saying I was the only boyfriend who she told where she lived since high school because of some stuff that had happened. She was dating an older guy who then ended up getting arrested at her house. Anyways, we break up but are still on good terms, and I come over to her house and she cooks me dinner. She was standing by the sink and I got up to get her a glass of water, and when I reached for the glass, she raised her arms and flinched back. I felt so bad, and I've never hit her. Another time I woke up in the morning and sort of sleepy-eyed just walked over to her kitchen and gave her a hug and she screamed. I'm way bigger than the average person in this country and probably 2.5 times her weight, and I guess if you've been beaten by men, that's intimidating. We still talk, and I think now she really trusts me a lot, even if we're just friends, but seeing that was something I'll never forget. Story 90. I was a Bering Sea fisherman for 8 years during my 3rd or 4th season. I decided it was a good idea to outswim everyone in the cold but water up in Dutch Harbor. It was not a good idea. I became lead rescue swimmer. After I showed off my grandpa swimming lesson skills, thrown in the water over your head and told to swim. So there I was, still somewhat green to even the fishing, let alone swimming in 40-foot swells after someone you can't see, but all the while knowing that you aren't going back on the boat yourself alive. The worst time of my life, I was out there 15 minutes, very tops. It felt like an eternity, and the waves were mind-blowing. I thought I'd be gone before starting. I had been through it before, getting ready, suiting up, but when the time came, past that they told me is sit on the outside hatch of the hauling station and just fall backwards now in 40-foot swells. It's insane. But I didn't hesitate. While they had me tied off, they were yelling to me. I saw a wave that would make it not much of a long drop. I thought about my mom and my sister, my brother. All in a matter of seconds, I was in that frozen bath with only a spotlight pointing where I was going. I thought I would save this guy or die trying. Now the boat was not in the trough, where it would have been. I go to the water, smash against the side of the boat, and maybe only end up with a broken back, which is what I was saying to myself as I was swimming where the light was pointing. I couldn't see a thing at all. It was black everywhere, completely consumed in it. I kept swimming and swimming. Every wave was like when you go over a hill that drops quick in the fast-moving vehicle. My nuts would shoot through my throat, and they beat onto me to the point of the water was coming in my rescue swimmer suit. I kept thinking if I could just get to him, they would see, and I could drag us back quickly. I didn't save anyone. I went in 3 times, pulling 2 bodies out. A time in my life I respected every man I worked with and won't forget, because even more died that didn't go overboard, but I always knew what to do for each emergency. While guys that have been on the boat 10 plus years froze when we needed everyone to play their part, but there are things I see on the fancy internet that make me say F. I would be unable to do a thing when it comes down to when telling if someone was through the thick crap of life can throw a hard say yes or no. I guess it would be what kind of crap they were in that you got your bad butt military guys who could have a 1,000-yard stare to the effing guy who was the nicest person in the world but was kicked the crap out of his whole life by the stepdad but won't see it happen to the other kids. It's hard to tell in most cases, I'd say. I don't know if that story made a ton of sense. There were no commas or anything like that, so I just tried to read it as he wrote it. Story 91. I noticed a difference between the way people who had not experienced a traumatic event reacted to the pandemic versus people who have trauma or chronic PTSD, like I do. It's not that I don't feel empathy about it, I just don't get freaked out when new traumatic things happen. Like last year, I had a surgery that ended up causing a near deadly infection and bone death over months before it got resolved. And I went through debridement procedures that were like torture because lidocaine doesn't go down to the bone. It was jaw surgery wounds that wouldn't heal and bone marrow got infected. When other people hear about this, they're horrified and say, "Why haven't you sued? That's horrible." And I'm just like, nah, whatever. I already lived through the worst things that can happen. Even if something similar happens as an adult, it won't be as bad as it would have happened to me as a child. That said, I'm extremely hypervigilant with normal everyday crap. I sit with my back to the wall in public. I will call someone out for touching me without asking, and I'd never allow it, and I don't trust anyone's intentions. I have a few close people I trust as much as possible, but there's still a wall that I do not take down. And yes, I'm getting professional help. Story 92. I've seen a lot of comments about being jumpy or flinching at nothing, and they're definitely correct. I now flinch and startle very easily. Ironically, now that I've begun my healing process, but when I was younger, no one could sneak up on me. Nobody. In hindsight, I realized it was because I was constantly on high alert, scanning for dangers. People would jump out at me, try to surprise me, but it never worked. It was like I had an unconscious sixth sense for where people were at any given moment, even if they didn't make a sound. On a similar note, I learned very young how to move silently. I'm not sure how I learned or why, but I have fleeting memories that lead me to believe I knew how to do it by age 3, and refined my skills as I aged. Only person I couldn't sneak up on was my brother. He also had the sixth sense. Story 93. It broke my arm. My first thought was, I can't feel my arm. Something is wrong. Then I called out for help. Was able to give the exact address for 911, and my supervisor was calm as heck, while everyone else, except for the EMTs, were freaking the F out. Plus, I kept apologizing to everyone. My boss and coworker who had to come to the scene to get my work vehicle, the EMTs because I thought I was being a hassle, the ladies who helped me. Everyone. I also apologized for cussing when the EMTs had to move me, and the feeling started coming back to my arm. When I got to the ER, I called my fiance, my kids, and my dad. After they gave me a warm blanket and I was safe and everyone else was taken care of, I finally and silently lost my crap. Story 94. There's a lot of answers here that are not good indicators at all. I grew up in foster care, and I've been through crap. seen others go through a lot of crap. Here's what I've seen. By and large, people who have been through crap tend to be in the crap for a long time afterwards. Some have mental health issues, PTSD, complex PTSD, ADHD. Yes, this is correlated with trauma, but it's not guaranteed. Eating disorders. Some have physical symptoms, morbid obesity, digestive issues, wetting the bed. This one was me until I was 12. Autoimmune disorders, common among incest apparently. By and large, those who have been through crap don't typically fare well. They end up incarcerated, heavily medicated, self-medicated, and tend to be behind in life when compared to peers. Occasionally, they get lucky. They learn good coping mechanisms by themselves or from a mental health professional. They spend time in residential treatment, maybe attend AA, become part of a community, usually religious, and sometimes thrive despite their crap hands they've been dealt. If you're looking for common tells, most of the time I see those same tells in healthy people. The ones that I rarely see in individuals who haven't had significant trauma. 1. As a teenager, you never went to their house. They went to yours. 2. Unhealthy relationships with food are common. Hoarding, gorging, avoidance. 3. Self-harm, wanting to self-unalive. 4. Lack of emotional mirroring or out of proportion reactions. Takes a lot to shock or excite them. Easily angered, easily overwhelmed. 5. Conversely, hyper attentive to emotions and actions and need to know what the plan is. Don't change it. 6. Overly friendly with complete strangers but neglectful of long-term relationships. Reactive attachment disorder. 7. Reckless decisions. 8. Significant lack of memory during the times of trauma. Can't remember childhood very well. Story 95. Optimism. Trauma affects people in a lot of different ways. I once met someone who was super optimistic about a project despite the many problems we faced. Every problem in the book got thrown at her. Group didn't want to communicate, busy schedule, avoiding each other, everything. Smiled through the whole thing like nothing was happening. Optimistic and gung-ho the whole way through. She ended up doing basically the whole project. We became good friends, and I eventually found out that as a child her parents forced her to do things she didn't want to do. Instruments and sports. Anything really, but she always got criticized for how she could have done even better. Obsessed with being perfect but having complete doubt she could do anything right. She told me that during the project she would literally cry from stress and her inability to get the group together. Story 96. I don't know what to say other than I've experienced and have done most of what you guys said. Have I been through crap? What do you consider mild or just pure trauma? I've had several occasions of that happening. One was when my teacher convinced me to do all of her work in 5th grade. She basically said the topic for the next day, and I have to type every word and letter on a short video lesson. I have to scavenge pictures and text from my textbook. After that, I have to make a news report each day and add questions after that. Then do my homework, go to school, and I and my classmate was assigned as the people who sold and sell the food on our classroom. And when my teacher's subject comes in, I would write that, I typed onto our notebooks, all of it, and give the USB to the other class she's teaching and pass the USB until every section had done the lesson. I've done that for our whole school year while dealing with my other 7 subjects. I am also assigned one day, Thursday, to do our so-called backtrack where we go and relearn the past lesson upon going with the lesson I made, the news with questionnaire and attendance. That's also why I have veiny hands, and I'm still extremely bad at math. Even after my mom had put me on tutoring on the same school year as I did all of that, and she was extremely disappointed I got 3rd place with at least a 91 or below average. Our top one always had 95 in average, I think, and I can't beat her. But she came from a private school. She was my friend. She's very nice to talk to. And her mom is very kind and texted me once. They're really nice and the only people that ever invited me to their birthday. The only invitation I got for an occasion, and she's the only one who gave me the first gift that I ever received from a classmate, a fidget spinner. I didn't know I actually needed that. Kind of made me focus more on my studies after I got that fidget spinner. I get distracted so easily. It's a very thoughtful gift. She's a very, very good friend. If you're her, thank you. There might be something I filled up with what I thought is since I have poor memory and can't remember it now. Sorry for bad English, I'm too lazy to fix any of it. Story 97. When you think if you gave that person one more chance, it'll be better. In my case, I've had a lot of toxic friendships where I was just so desperate to not lose someone I thought cared about me or thought they needed a friend, so I endured more abuse. I almost typed let it happen, but it's not my fault. I tried everything in the Reddit playbook, boundaries, asking not to do what they did, telling them flat out, didn't stop it. They felt genuinely like they could treat me like I was lesser than garbage and I just had to take it, or I'd have to listen to a lecture or be verbally abused, or at one point deliberately triggering a panic attack to punish me. Sometimes there's no such thing as communication when it comes to a monster. I unfortunately learned that monsters are real and they have the faces of everyone else. The only good that came out of it was learning who my real friends were, the ones who stood beside me in my darkest hours, who picked me up when someone else kicked me when I was down. Those are the people I can trust with my life, and the ones who kicked me while I was down while justifying whatever it was that time, gone. Out of my life. Don't need them. Because sometimes cutting them out is better than finding out what else they might do. Story 98. I've been seeing a therapist for a little while now, primarily to help with the late diagnosed ADHD. However, after we went through all the family background stuff, she has spent quite a long time on my childhood and my mom in particular. Being a young child and having to be the adult to a parent that has bipolar is crushing. Don't get me wrong, she was and is very loving, but she should have been looking after me, not the other way around. Then I feel bad thinking about it that way, as she obviously couldn't help having bipolar. Reading some of these comments, though, has made me realize I do have one of these tells without ever knowing it. If you're not familiar with bipolar, there are cycles of depression and mania, and an unknown normal time in the middle. As a kid, I would always be paying close attention to her behaviors and mannerisms to see when the next cycle would begin, and I can see now I am always on the lookout for people's expressions and moods to change. Compared to lots of people, I haven't gone through nearly the same level of trauma, but I am at least realizing now in the Middle Ages what I considered normal was certainly not.